So what is history? It's not the old and the moldy, as I like to tell my students. It's fundamentally about how the world changes. History is the study of change over time. It's an account of the past based on surviving sources. Kind of like a detective work. You have to find the clues that were left behind by previous generations in order to know how things changed. And therefore, it's always a kind of dialogue between what we want to know and what we can know about the past. So how does women's history figure into this description that I've just given you? Well, I guess the first problem is many people think women don't change. What is there to study? They're born, they grow up, they get married, they have babies, they die. And you know, the old saying that a respectable woman is noticed in the newspaper only when she marries and when she dies. So women have often not left much of a record of their own. They were often not taught to read and write for many years, but more importantly, the kinds of things they did were often not considered worth recording or preserving. And the third point, I guess, is that we have not been as interested in women, we meaning the general public, the readers, the consumers of history, particularly those who consider history to be a succession of kings and rulers and wars. And the assumption is that private experience or individual and group experience that does not hit the headlines is not very important. So a number of things have to change in order to create the field of women's history. We need to acknowledge change. We need to look for new sources of information. And then we need to ask questions, the kinds of questions that you and I asked when we were younger about our own lives, questions that are powerfully addressed in women's history.
The historian Mary Beard, who was one of the first professional historians of American women working in the early part of the 20th century, had a saying, which was, "No documents, no history." She was passionate about collecting the documents that would allow us to tell the history of women in America in particular, and many of those documents wound up in the Schlesinger Library. The work of collecting and preserving and caretaking of family papers, like so much other care work, has been the work of women throughout history. Much of what we know about wars and kings and public life comes to us because women took care of their husbands' letters and their husbands' professional papers and got those into libraries. The Schlesinger Library's work is collecting not only documents that were often saved by women, but that chronicle the history of women. And we'll be looking at some of those in this course. We'll be looking in particular at the kinds of documents that are material objects, which is actually only a small part of what Schlesinger collects. But some very special collections have objects with them that are fascinating puzzles and storytellers. What we hope you will see in this course is that you start with an object that is small and particular and material, sort of irreducible in its physicality, and we go out and out and out in concentric circles, and you wind up with a history of the world in the 20th century. I think that's one of the things that we want learners to come away with, is a sense that you can't have history without documents, and you can't have history without women's history.
Jane, I love the way you described this course as moving in concentric circles. So what we're going to do is we're going to begin in each object with a close look, a really serious look. Often I think we see things without really consciously examining them. So part one, examine the object. And then once you do that, you're going to have a lot of questions. What's going on here? Where did this come from? Why does it matter? Those questions become the kind of agenda that lead us into further research. And that can take the form of consulting experts, people who know something about the object or the person who saved it or used it. The ultimate result is to understand the world as a more complex and interconnected place than we may have considered before. Not to give us a complete history of the 20th century or of women, but to invite us to become investigators of our own past, perhaps even our personal past, and certainly of the world that continues to shape our lives today.